To expand on this and other trade-related matters, we are joined by Senior Economist at Steel Engineering Industry Federation of South Africa, SABC, Tafadzwa Chibanguza. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
All right, just your general overview regarding trade conditions in the country. What do you think the status quo is?
Depressed, if I had to sum it up in a word, right? And the reason for that is when we look at particularly our side, right, beginning and if we talk up to this June 2017, which is pretty much the latest data that we've seen in our figures that we look at SABC, you see that anyone exposed to fixed investment is actually in trouble. That was a statement that was said by one of our member company associations, and we've seen just also because of the general low business confidence, there's not much investment taking place, activity levels are weak, and this has been a persistent trend since the beginning of this year. So we started the year on a relatively optimistic view, and since the beginning of the year, with each successive data point, that has just continued to deteriorate. In fact, in concluding on this question, Colin, one of the points we've been saying with each successive data point is that 2017 is also starting to look like 2016 in terms of how bad the year was, which is very different from the optimism that we expected at the beginning of the year.
Looking at the government's intervention in as far as the policy review is concerned, we've heard Malusi Gigaba, Finance Minister, speaking last week about the changes that are going to be induced, but many economists are saying that they're not going to really make much of a difference now.
You see, I would put it this way, right? Growth is not something that one just waves a magic wand and you get going, right? What we need to be doing is we need to be having economic policy reviews or economic policy levers that try to induce or increase confidence, right? That is the almost most sure way of ensuring that you will get growth as well. Now, the points are, they are good in nature, they're well intended, but we have to understand that I've got a colleague who always uses the example that to steer a ship you need about 1 kilometer or so, and of a lot of work. I mean, everything on that ship is moving to turn that ship, and that's essentially what we need. So while well intended, firstly we have to see execution, and then after we see execution, we have to understand that there's a lead time or a lag to any policies having impact. So I guess it's a wait and see.
Now, when we look at your industry, we've been seeing very low appetite for commodities, especially the steel sector, which has been struggling for quite a number of months, looking at the numbers being on the downside, and now the current wage negotiations and the imminent job losses that you're looking forward to in your industry now. So how far have you gone?
So on the steel side, increasingly an interesting statistic for the viewers is that as long as GDP growth is less than 2.5%, you actually have negative steel consumption. All right. So at 0.3%, which is what we had last year, we know now the latest figures show us that we're in recession, and a lot of the GDP figures that we've seen, the forecasts for this year, that is, are now talking. I've seen some as low as another 0.3 for 2017. So if one had to use that as your demand proxy for steel, naturally, what then that tells you that the steel industry and steel and engineering, which is who we represent, is in trouble. Again, we are heavily exposed to fixed investment, and fixed investment being from state-owned entities, from the mining industry, petrochemicals, etc. So in an environment of low business confidence, what naturally you then see is weak demand, to your very point that you asked, weak demand of our products. So in a nutshell, essentially the point is that we are in trouble given the low business confidence.
So you don't have the latest, because I understand the talks are still going on.
The latest is the talks are still going on. We do have a formal communication platform where wage negotiations are discussed. This is also on our website. unfortunately, I wouldn't want to say too much around the wage negotiations, but they are going ahead, and I guess one can only say that we hope.
Well, I can tell you, I've been trying to speak to two sides of the story, and nothing has been forthcoming. But anyway, I really don't want to pin you down regarding that. But let's talk about the steel sector on the international front, especially looking at the U.S. economy, where Donald Trump started first by the inward-looking economic policies, and right now, in the story that I've just read earlier, we hear that there are talks taking place between China and the U.S. and to look at China's excess capacity in steel and aluminium. Why do you think there are changes right now? It looks like there's a turnaround.
I'll put it this way. Inward-looking policies are never good, right? And that's across the board. So in a world where we are increasingly globalizing, trying to buck that trend is essentially going the wrong way. Trying to go against the trend is essentially the wrong way. So the way I read the same story is that it's actually a realization of the fact that maybe there's of course an error in thinking that we can do it alone. So we need economic partners, we need the scale that other countries can give us, yes, and even the Chinese. The unfortunate thing that you mentioned, which is a very important point, is that the Chinese steel capacity and basically commodity producing capacity, they have significant excess. If I can give you global figures, 1.6 billion metric tons of steel are produced in the world. China produces about 800 million of that. And with their slowing economy, what you then have is slower consumption of their own production, of their own steel production. So that now opens up a whole wide balance for them to then export, literally at cost, right, around the world. So the idea then becomes that I'm sure even with the US trade experts, they'll be approaching that cautiously and maybe trying to use that as their negotiating lever or try to work around that. But essentially the point I want to get at is that to think that one can close themselves off from the world is in fact an error, and I think that's the realization they've come to there.
All right, thank you very much for making that point. All right, that's Tafadzwa Chibanguza, who is Senior Economist at SABC, bringing us to the end of our business segment right now, but I'll be back after 4.